Hi, everyone. I'm Kristen Marcel. I'm the director of the Climigration Network, and I'm so excited to be with all of you today and to bring both Jackie Qataliña Schaeffer and Twyla Thurmond here to share about the Unmet Needs report that they have been working on over the last couple of years. This is
I'm gonna get my folder.
We're just going to ask folks just for the near term, if you could mute. We are going to be recording this so that we can share it on our website. So the unmet needs of environmentally threatened Alaskan Native villages, assessment and recommendations, is a report that offers recommendations to improve the effectiveness of federal and state government support for Alaskan communities to address climate and environmental threats through risk reduction, protect in place, manage retreat, and relocation methods. I have been speaking with Jackie now for, oh gosh, probably about 6 months. Just very excited about this report. And just wonderful to finally be here on the day where we get to share it. And Twyla Thurmond has been a member of our Climigration Network and an advisor and a partner and a leader on our Climigration Network Council now for the last year plus, and we are so excited to have both of them here. I think that if folks feel comfortable introducing themselves in the chat, maybe just sharing your name, your affiliation, anything you'd like to share about where you're calling in from, just so people can get a chance to get to know each other as we move into the presentation and know who's here in the Zoom room with us. As we shared at the beginning, we are recording this session so that we can bring it to more of our Climigration Network members going forward. So let's move into the presentation and share the slides so we can introduce more formally Twyla and Jackie. So here we have Twyla's bio. As I said, she's been an incredible partner and voice for both the Alaskan Native Village of Shishmaref, but also more broadly for Alaska Native communities. And she's been a member of our leadership now for more than a year. Just an incredible opportunity to partner with Twyla. We've learned so much from her. Twyla, is there anything you'd like to share about yourself?
Well, I was originally born and raised for the majority of my life in Shishmaref. And I think I moved away when I was 11 or so. So a lot of my childhood, I grew up there on a subsistence type of lifestyle. My dad was away at work a lot. So my mom both worked and taught us how to subsist from the land and pick berries and greens. My older brothers did a lot of hunting. Shishmaref is very, very small. It has about 600 to 700 people. It's an island in northwestern Alaska, so it's very small, very remote. I've spent a lot of time in Anchorage, and I have some family in Tacoma, Seattle area. I'm here now in Seattle, actually visiting family and doing some Christmas shopping. But I did want to chime in and say hello to everybody, just so you get a feeler for my voice and where I root.
Thank you so much, Twyla. And I'd like to introduce Jackie Qataliña Schaeffer. She is with the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, and they have been in the lead role developing the Unmet Needs report. And as I said, it's been wonderful communicating with Jackie over the last 6 months, and just lots of excitement coming into this opportunity to share the recommendations of this report. I personally have read it from cover to cover, and it's comprehensive and well organized, and just a wonderful, wonderful voice for the needs of Alaska Native communities. Jackie, is there anything you'd like to share about yourself before we get started?
Yeah, just hello Rikbin, mga atika Qataliña, nalagmechiska Jackie Schaeffer, inyupainarunga, anirunga Kikitarumi. I am just a little bit north of Shishmaref. I was born and raised in the community of Kikiktaru, which is Kotzebue, named after the Russian explorer who founded us. I'd like to say that because I just think that's hilarious. But yeah, so I was born and raised in Kotzebue, very traditional lifestyle, Inupiaq lifestyle, and half the year at fish camp and half the year in Kotzebue. And, you know, no different than Twyla, those formative years when you are born and raised on the land and water that your ancestors, well, in my case, have been there for 500 generations or more. It really does make an impact to how you view the world and how you view how you maneuver in the world, especially with so many changes in a very short amount of time. So if you consider us living in the same geographic space on the planet for over 20,000 years, you know, 150 years of colonization and complete change across the globe, because I just came from COP, and it is really amazing how colonized our world is. You know, there was so much change in 150 years that little sliver of time in a few generations have impacted our world in so many ways. So I like to share that because really our traditional philosophies and the way we look at the world, because our brains were wired different, it just gives us a different worldview. And I think that's really important, because sometimes it's hard to understand where someone's coming from when you don't understand that their worldview is completely different than a Western worldview. So I'll just share that. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. And thank you for sharing that introduction. It's so beautiful and so important. Before we move into your presentation, I wanted to just create some space for Twyla to share her reflections, to kind of introduce the report. Twyla, is there anything you might be feeling moved to share just about, you know, the generation of the report, or how it went, or your thoughts coming out of the report process, and your hopes for it, anything along those lines, your reflection?
Sure. The purpose of the report, like you've shared already and people can see, is to improve the effectiveness of federal and state government support for Alaska Native communities. Also to address climate and environmental threats to infrastructure, from erosion, from flooding, and permafrost degradation. And to amplify example factors, places like Seattle, Portland, Anchorage, larger cities, they have things like parks, recreational monuments, libraries, job centers, food banks, shelters for the homeless and DV related instances, and the like. Villages like Shishmaref and Kotzebue, we have very little. Shishmaref has a school, a bingo and community hall that's in very poor condition, which is utilized as a multi-purpose facility and structure. Living in the 21st century, we have never had running water. Many families living in the same overcrowded housing, as many as 3 families in a single family dwelling. There is no library, there aren't any play places, and very little jobs available for the people. So in this facet, we seem to have been forgotten. We hunt and gather our own food, and when we cannot, we have to make do with what necessities are at the store, and toiletries at 2 to 4 times the cost or more. than largely populated cities, and 38% of our communities in rural Alaska all face these issues. Poverty without the palpable tools and support to flourish as a community. So we kind of remain stagnant in a third world living condition. Although culturally rich, we tend to be intuitive by nature. Rural village residents have very limited opportunities to learn and to grow. We utilize distance ed, there isn't a college. And without a regulatory school system, social integration for our youngest leaders is tough because the kiddos become fearful and homesick when opportunities present for growth in both learning and education abroad. And I think that has a lot to do with the older generation being forced into school systems like I'm trying to remember the wordage for it, like boarding schools, you know, forced away from their families without being able to visit. So perpetual healing is still in the midst of taking place for our people who've nearly for a century have had a bipolar relationship with funding and entities and Western civilization in general, especially with our United States government. At times, we're grateful with what little amenities and perks we're able to get, but other times we've resorted to having to beg, plead, and eventually get angry and loud with frustration when we're asking for things like running water, which is now thankfully in the process of becoming a reality for Shishmaref. Formal education and the ability to articulate at a level that lessens the broader stereotypical perspective is an injustice to our people. While there are folks traveling to the moon, we've gone without running water and the basics at a palpable cost. As an example, we have had to travel across our small 2-mile town carting a 50-gallon garbage bin of water to collect for washing and drinking. And we collect our own waste, like the pee and the poop, in 5-gallon buckets and haul them to the dump site ourselves. A question that has reverberated amongst our people is, how are we considered part of America when we are left with mere scraps and third world living conditions? With the 2021 Unmet Needs Report, we're able to share and articulate our needs and have literature and words to back up our stance and our frustrations. So I guess what we need now are plans and actions to facilitate efforts for change. How do we formulate effective communications to our governments and helping agencies that activate these changes? How do we reach them and share with them how absolutely necessary it is to alter policies to leave no man behind? I hope some of these thoughts and sharing has sparked some ideas or got the thought process rolling on how together we can help the changes we need see fruition.
Thank you, Twyla. Thank you so much. That was very, very powerful and so important to hear that story. Thank you. Jackie, would you like to share more about this report?
Yeah, so this really is a follow-up to the previous report that was completed on unmet needs. And I do like to highlight that this report does reflect the concerns towards infrastructure, which is Western infrastructure, not traditional infrastructure. And that is something that a lot of things that are highlighted or not highlighted in this report really are coming to the surface of all the things of unmet needs that we still are facing. So I'll share a little bit more in the introduction slides with about the Tribal Health Consortia, but really it is, you know, in my lifetime, I grew up without water and sanitation, and Kotzebue is a little bit bigger than Shishmaref. So by the time I was in high school, we had water and sewer. But really that transition and that space from being a child who helped chip ice for drinking water, and then growing into this Western infrastructure of running water and having showers at home, not in just one place, really does change. It changes how you look at the world, and how, you know, really we were colonized, but we weren't modernized. And so unfortunately, because the decision makers are so far away from Alaska, there is a lot of, forgotten people, right? But, you know, I'm an optimist, and I grew up on the land, and I just came from Dubai, and I don't want that world. I want to protect the Arctic and keep it the Arctic, and I want to keep our culture intact, and I want to keep our way of living intact as I eat reindeer soup for lunch. So yeah, so it really does kind of highlight that. So, and to remember that this report does not bring up some of the other issues like food sovereignty and access to food resources that are impacted by climate change. It doesn't bring up the mental and behavioral health components that your layers and layers and layers of trauma on a small population of people that are American citizens. And there's no response to that. You know, we have better healthcare than we did, but we still have people who have to fly 700 miles to deliver a baby and leave their family behind. So you're born in trauma. And then during COVID, you know, some of our elders were shipped away to a hospital to die in trauma. And so really those inequities are human rights issues. So there's, you know, there's a lot more to talk about, but this report is something that is one step in one direction and focuses on some of those barriers and challenges that we face when it comes to Western infrastructure in our rural communities. So I'll just leave that there, because really, you know, until we deal with the human rights issue, which is the injustice, we're not going to come up with solutions that are equitable. We could say we're trying, but we're just trying. We're not going to actually be impactful in an equitable way unless we deal with the human rights issue. So that's a whole different issue, but it's something that's near and dear to my heart. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Twyla.
Well, so grateful to both of you for sharing those thoughts and perspectives before we walk into the report, because I think it's such important framing, just considering what's here and what's not here, and how many of these conversations we still need to have. So thank you both. I'm going to ask our audience to mute yourself if you haven't already as we move into Jackie's presentation. And Maggie, could you share Jackie's slides?
Do you want me to share? I don't mind sharing. However you want to do it.
Why don't you do that? Because then you can move at your own pace, and I won't slow you down.
Okay, and I'll turn my video off for now. All right. Okay, let me get this into presentation mode. Hold on. All right, is it in presentation mode, or are you seeing two slides? Oh,
It's in presentation mode. It looks great on our end.
you just have the one slide?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, hello, Rick Ben. Hello, in Inupiaq. We have 11 distinct cultures in Alaska. We are all not the same. It's very much a comparison to Europe, not to, you know, all the Indians are the same, is how they gave the perspective for the lower 48. Well, when it comes to Alaska, we have 11 distinct different tribes, and Twyla and I are part of the Inuit, and the Inuit of the north of the Arctic encompass not only Alaska, but northern Canada, Greenland, and Russia. And so really it's these slides will help you understand a little bit about who we are and some of our differences. I have a few slides in here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. This is more for informational. So when you share the slide deck, you actually get to learn a little more about the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium, which is the statewide tribal health network. We have 4 core areas: environmental health, our hospital, the Alaska Native Medical Center, community health, and then we also have a support service that allows us to have internet access to our communities to provide telehealth. We have a unique tribal health compact with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the funding partially comes through the Indian Health Service. So this is just a little bit more for you to just understand the consortium, because we're more than just a tribal hospital. Our program, Climate Initiatives, resides under the Community Environment and Health division, and we have other programs that reside under Community Environment and Health that kind of feed into, we all work together as one, and really we our community health services promote wellness through technical assistance, research, education, disease prevention. Climate Initiatives was formed a year ago. We are celebrating our first year of this program. It is in partnership with NOAA, and our goal and our vision is to coordinate activities across the campus to support the Alaska tribal health system, as well as finding healthy ways for our communities to adapt in our changing world. Under Climate Initiatives, we house 2 centers: the Center for Climate and Health, and the Center for Climate and Health is really focused on the connection between plants, animals, and humans, cross-vector disease such as rabies or avian flu, which is cross-vectored from birds to the bird flu has crossed over to animal species, and that group focuses on the potential of harm to human health. In our case, it also focuses on traditional food resources, because we still access in some of our rural communities up to 80% of our indigenous foods supply our freezers and cupboards, and only 20% come from the Western grocery store. So it really is like understanding what's happening in a changing world, especially with migratory birds, because they come from another part of the planet, and really just understanding what those risks are to human health. We also support the Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities, which is where this report resides. And that is our response team to really work directly with communities to advocate for equitable climate solutions for all of our 229 tribes in the state, as well as have these unique relationships with communities to help them assist in plans for adaptation, mitigation, relocation, or future climate-related initiatives. We also work on the national and international level with partnerships with the federal government, other programs, BIA, Tribal Resilience, EPA, FEMA, and also with the Inuit Circumpolar Council. I recently attended COP28 as a knowledge holder for ICC, and really just building those Indigenous relationships as well as relationships with our federal partners. So I went over the Center for Climate and Health. We also have the Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities. The center has been active for about 7 years, supported over 40 communities with 150 projects totaling over $50 million. They also contributed this team to the May 2022 GAO analysis titled Federal Agencies Could Enhance Support for Native Village Efforts to Address Environmental Threats. And then, of course, this is our team that has worked so hard in the last couple of years on this current report, which is just recently published. And now I'm going to dive into the report itself. This report took years of collaboration, and I stepped into this role just a year ago. I can see there's something in the chat. Okay, just want to make sure I'm not missing something there. And so one of my deliverables as the Director of Climate Initiatives was to make sure that we got this report published. And And the importance of it really was timely because there were so many other things that kind of aligned with this. The federal government agencies were trying to figure out how they could better coordinate. And really, because they're so far away, how do they truly understand and grasp the impacts to Alaska rural communities? The only reason that the United States is an Arctic nation is because of Alaska, and our communities are on the forefront of climate impact. So this is a collaboration between our team at AMTHC and the State of Alaska Division of Community and Regional Affairs. We also had support of with community support and regional support within the review process, and that has had many renditions. So we're very happy to finally come to this happy medium. And really the purpose of this report, like you said, is to just improve the effectiveness of working with our federal partners and eliminating some of the barriers by recommending some solutions. Our audience obviously is the US Congress, the White House, federal and state agencies, and then program managers for all those delivery systems. This is just a visual. Something that was really important to me is to have many methods of ways to communicate in the report. I personally am a visual person, so I really wanted to make sure that if we had a 200-page document, that there were pull-away sheets that people could take and really digest. And so we kind of shifted and pivoted a little bit towards the end of the report and created some graphics to help people understand exactly what we are trying to communicate. So we have 229 federally recognized tribes. 40% of all tribes in the US reside in Alaska. We are a fifth of the size of the entire continental US. Something we don't have on here is that we have more shoreline than the entire US, continental US, just in one state. You can see we cover almost the entire US. We have the highest energy and cost of living. We have very small populations. And then we have this hidden economy, this subsistence lifestyle that most of our rural communities live on. And this way of living has been part of their world for thousands of years, but it's not a monetary system. The only commercial thing that can be sold from that subsistence obviously salmon is one thing, so fisheries, and then the only animal is reindeer. Reindeer meat's the only one that you'll see in the grocery stores. So everything else is pretty much just as a way of living for our people. Logistical challenges. Most of these communities are off-road communities, and out of all of our communities, 43% of the state's communities are threatened by some type of climate impact. We currently have 144 rural villages that are on our list of environmental communities. And some of the impacts we're seeing at the local level are starting to become trends. So there's this cycle that happens, and melting permafrost is a great example. It releases methane, which accelerates the atmospheric response to climate. That in itself, if it washes into a river or into the ocean, it accelerates the rate of water rising, which then starts that weather cycle. So this is something that we're seeing: extreme and unpredictable storm systems. It increases wind speeds, it changes the air temperature, and then you have these pockets. And one great example is last fall we had a tropical storm come up from the Pacific. There was a pocket, a layer of warm water still on the ocean, and so that storm picked up to that water and accelerated and hit the coast of Alaska. No one ever imagined that would have happened, that a storm from the Pacific would come all the way up and impact the state as kind of a mini typhoon. And so we have to recognize all these things, and then you have to catalog them in order so you understand at least what's triggering those accelerated rates. We know the Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the global average. And all of these things, precipitation, air temperature, wind speed, sea level rise, the severity of storms are all increasing, and they're very unpredictable. I'm going to just share some images because to me they're impactful. This is the community of Buckland after riverine flooding in the spring. This is an overnight sea surge in Qataliña, and this is where the ice just basically shoved up onto the shore and destroyed core infrastructure. The pipe to the left there is a utilidor that houses their water and sanitation pipes. This is a community of Shishmaref in the YK Delta. This shows you what's happening with the permafrost melt and what it's doing to destroy not only pipe water and sewer infrastructure, but also housing. This is a family that was displaced because their house became unsafe because of that shifting of the from the permafrost melt. And so it just goes on and on. We have community after community dealing with this. This is another building in severe permafrost degradation in Quinahawk. Quinahawk is one of the communities in the YK Delta. We have several, but this is one community that faces not only river erosion, but ocean erosion, as well as permafrost degradation. So this shows the preschool building. This is where the kids go to school. And they're struggling to find ways to save their infrastructure. This is the community of Shishmaref. This shows you that riverine erosion. Basically, in that silty shoreline is permafrost, and that permafrost, you don't have the sea ice protection, so you no longer have that sea ice fall protection free from nature, this infrastructure from nature to protect you from these fall storms. And so what happens is that water hits the shoreline and it triggers that permafrost. So it's triggering this melt laterally, and then you see these chunks just fall off because you're looking at silt and very ice-rich silt, right? So this is a great example of what we're seeing across the state of Alaska. And remembering that these communities were all placed there during Western contact, because that's where people were in the summer collecting their summer harvest for their food. And so they just assumed that that's where they lived, since that's where they were at that moment in time. And so most of our people were migratory. They migrated with the food. So we have to remember that this is not by choice. This is by force. So, and in that, then we have communities that have to choose now to either protect in place, do a managed retreat, which is basically hopscotching away from danger, or a full relocation if you don't have the option. So here we have a forced location at Western Contact, and now you have a forced relocation, but it's a different day and age, and now you have to negotiate with somebody who owns that land, whereas before you could just migrate with your food source. And so this is all new to our people. They didn't choose to live there, and now they're being forced to relocate. So there's an injustice there. So how do we make it more equitable and hopefully learn from this process what not to do in the future? So this is a geographic comparison map with some of the images of storms across. You'll see the flooding in Golovin 2022 up there in the corner. That was from Typhoon Merbok, which hit the coast of Alaska, the remnants of a typhoon, causing that damage. The picture below it is the community of Nuktak, which is a Yupik community in the YK Delta. It's currently about 50% fully relocated. The funding is not flowing in fast enough to move people in a timely fashion. Therefore, families are separated, kids are separated. They're demoing their school while they're trying to build a new school. So it costs a lot of money, and the response is just not there. The unmet needs of our communities, basically we have this inequitable delivery system of resources and services. This in the corner is a healthy community that usually has 2 or 3 people that are fighting for their community. And then they have to maneuver through this mess of federal and state agencies and programs. And usually the red blocks are what you see is what they're told, because they are trying to maneuver a system, whereas in an urban setting, you would have a planning department, you would have a grants department, you would have all these separated, but you have one person trying to maneuver in all this space, making it very inequitable. And so really all they want is their vision is to have that healthy and safe community. But really for many of these communities, the current system is like trying to assemble a 10,000 piece puzzle with no picture on it and just maneuvering in that space. The lack of funding, this is old estimates because this has been a couple of years in the making, and those costs just keep going up. Now, these are mitigation costs by region, and this is not for damaged infrastructure, replacement of infrastructure or anything. This is just for needed over the next 50 years to mitigate infrastructure damage. That means protect it in place. We estimate that there's an $80 million annual funding gap over the next decade for critical averting costs of disaster. And really our government has been, I feel a shift, but we have been a disaster response. And so everything's after the fact. We wait for the disaster and then we respond, but it's too costly now for us to do that. So how do we strategically look at this through a different lens? And prevent some of the erosion, flooding, and permafrost related disasters. We figure we could save up to $25.8 billion in response and recovery costs if we took a different approach. Despite the existence of 60 funding programs, we have 7 that have aided environmentally threatened communities in Alaska, and just 2 programs are specific to support tribes to protect in place, manage retreat, or relocate. We have limited local capacity. One limited capacity is because we just don't have the population numbers. And so this is Walter Nelson of Napakiak. He is a managed retreat coordinator, and during emergency efforts to decommission the infrastructure due to rapid erosion, I mean, it's one person trying to maneuver in that space, and the government's telling them, well, we can't help you because you have low capacity scores. There is no other way to look at it, but inequitable, right? It's just not a system set up to help the reality of our communities. So small Alaska communities often assume that they have the capabilities of those big cities, but they really don't. And so additional funding is necessary to hire and train at the community locally based. And that's covered in Chapter 5 of the report. Technical assistance. Technical assistance is really community specific, multidisciplinary. Technical assistant teams are needed to support our communities because there's so many thousands of tasks associated with risk assessments, planning, implementation, project development, implementing those projects, and then the oversight. So current federal programs such as FEMA, BIA, Tribal Resilience, EPA, they exclude or make it really difficult for our tribes for the technical assistance component. So that is a highlight in this document as well. Community-specific hazard data and analysis, we honestly don't know what we're dealing with because we've been a reactive response system. We've been an emergency response as things happen. And so we need to understand really what we're dealing with. And how do we do that? We need to perform highly technical risk assessments, getting that permafrost data, getting that erosion and flooding data so that communities can make informed decisions. And then working with the community through technical assistance. If they don't have the people to build capacity, there has to be a support network there to help them. And at the time of this publication, staff from the State of Alaska, NTHC, and other federal agencies have started to look at a community climate risk assessment program to fill this critical gap. And so our hope is that the report will highlight the critical gap, and then we start working towards those solutions. Agency coordination, this is just a web of federal agencies. It makes my mind hurt by looking at it. And this is what communities are dealing with. And there's lack of even internal federal agency coordination within the federal agencies themselves. So everyone is now having to look internally and how could their systems better support the external piece of this and really look at climate change and environmental threats in this in a different way, through a different lens, and making those significant adjustments to how they collaborate, how they improve accessibility, how they improve the equity and efficiency of their programs. So the report has three main recommendations. And again, this is focused on infrastructure. One is to have a single funding source based on risk. Right now, our communities compete against each other, not only each other in the state of Alaska, but all tribes across the nation. And so that makes it very difficult for small communities that are impacted by layers of climate threats to even be competitive in that space. So to be effective, we recommend that the entity that receives the gap funding has Alaska-based staff in Alaska, so they understand it, Alaska-based leadership, and they have experience supporting community infrastructure development and environmental threats in rural Alaska. And that is really important, because if you don't understand the realities, the policy and the decision-making on the federal side will never match the reality of what's happening on the local community side. So a viable alternative to a single funding source is dedicated funding to multiple agencies who collaborate and fund projects from a common priority list. So, and the only way we're going to get that common priority list is to understand by risk which communities are at the highest risk factor. So this is just another slide to help our partners understand what we need to do in order to get to the place that would be more equitable. And then the second one is to remove some of those barriers to equity. We recommend that they remove programmatic barriers and improve program design for small tribal and rural communities. We also recommend that they implement changes in enabling legislation and place conditions on appropriation of funding for federal programs to remove barriers that limit access and reduce effectiveness. All of this is identified, the barriers and solutions and recommendations in Appendix C of the report. And this is just an example of that. So you have effective programs, you have beneficial programs with potential, and then some other programs that trying to figure out how to infuse it so we have more lateral movement within that federal space. And there's a lot of barriers in, within the federal government themselves. And then the third recommendation is a whole of government implementation framework for Alaska. Alaska is unique. At some point, we have to remember that Alaska is the only reason the United States is an Arctic nation, and focus on that. It needs to be prioritized. It can't just be this afterthought. Oh, there's these communities in Alaska that need help, and then this flow of funding comes once in a while. So we recommend that they create this framework, and this really shows what we would love to see. You have community leadership in orange on the top of the blanket toss, which is a celebration for the Inuit of the North. We use a sealskin to create the blanket, and it's like the first trampoline, but it's human powered. And really the bottom is all the entities working together towards those community goals. And what would that look like? This is our proposed draft of a environmentally threat implementation framework. And really you work in teams to help support the community, because community needs are very specific to their community. This illustrates some of the potential operational framework with specific agency roles, and this is described in Chapter 6 of the report. On the top, we have a local community has a local and regional coordinator. Like I said, some communities are so small they may not have capacity for a local coordinator. Maybe it needs to be at the regional level, and somebody at the regional level is that communicator to the federal and state partners. And then you have that tribal state shown at the bottom, and the tribal state federal co-chairs administer this framework so that you're constantly checking the pulse of is it really working? That's something else that happens in Alaska is things are thrown out there, but if they don't work, they just walk away. We need some kind of accountability process. And then this is really nationally significant because it's important to protect our communities and cultures. The uniqueness is not just enough, but it's the fact that we make the U.S. an Arctic nation. And it's not just buildings, it's the sustainability of entire communities and cultures. We have 11 distinct cultures. We have over 200 language dialects. We have over 20 recognized languages. And everything from frozen Arctic to rainforest. So we have to look at not only the ecology and the geographic space of Alaska, but all of this is going to be impacted by climate change in different ways. And so we recommend that this serve as a nationwide model because in our state, we have everything that would be, say, from northern Minnesota to the bayous of Louisiana. We have that here. Maybe not swampland as bad, it's just different, but the YK Delta is all swampland. So again, we would like very much for this report to be a national significant report that hopefully we could take some lessons learned from the past and create a more equitable way to move into the future. And that's all I have. So, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jackie. That was an amazing presentation. Really, really appreciate it. Encouraging everyone to go and read the full report because it is just as fabulous as that presentation. Just so full of, so rich and full of powerful thoughts and motivations for change. Twyla, I want to give you some space to just share any final reflections before we see if we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Is there anything you'd like to share?
Just that I love Jackie. She did such an amazing job. I think everything that was shared was very fruitful, and I hope people take something from it.
Thank you. So, are there questions in the audience? Anyone have a burning question? I have a couple that can start us off if people don't have anything. Oh, Marcy, yes, please go ahead.
Yes, hi. First, Jackie, thank you so much. I'm still taking in all that you said and trying to. I've heard threads of it before, but you put it together really beautifully, and I'll be going back to the report to look at it. The space that I've been working in is culture and heritage in relation to climate change. And I noticed right at the end, you mentioned the uniqueness of Alaskan culture. And I was trying to frame a question, then you mentioned it. I think the simplest way I can put it is, are there any specific elements of support that you can see are needed to support Alaskan culture? Or would it be really helpful if all of the other stuff could be figured out so that Alaskan cultures themselves can do what they need to do to keep themselves going forward, to keep the language and the connections and stories and all of those traditions? So I guess my question is just sort of, is there specific support for cultures, or is it try to solve all the other problems will really support you carrying your cultures forward?
That's a great question. You know, I, as a knowledge holder, and I do everything from plant symposiums to, I'm really fascinated by our food systems because I get to eat the same foods that my ancestors did 500 generations ago. That blows my mind. But recently, you know, some of the studies that are coming out on seals and the nutritional value, as well as I shared an article yesterday about bowhead whales, which is a big part of my diet, and their ability to resist cancers. They are cancer resistant. So there's things that we simply don't know, right? So it's not just about our culture and the preservation of knowledge, But we have knowledge gaps because of colonization. So I would say, yes, supporting culture bearers so that they could learn more. And maybe this is where then we bridge the knowledge systems together and take some scientific, I mean, what about the people who have been eating bowhead whale? How cancer resistant? Did it shift their DNA? Did they create, did they get the mechanism? So there's a lot of things that we simply don't know. So, our languages are all land-based, but I have read some articles when it comes to health indicators that when you return a language to 50% of a small populated community, suicide rates go to zero. So there are health factors, protective factors within the language itself, because our language is not like English language is very linear and flat, right? Our language is living. It's it's not words that you connect together to create a sentence, to create a paragraph. Our language is Hilurik bin is one word, and it means how are you doing? How are you feeling? And so like hello, welcome to my space. It's more than simply a word. And so I think that too is part of it, is how do we make sure that we don't lose not only the language, but the essence and knowledge that is infused into that connection into nature. So I like to say that we live in this harmonious dance with nature, and the climate change and environmental impacts disrupt that. So I think there's opportunity, especially in communities relocating, that we re-infuse some of those cultural displacements that were taken at contact. So Western contact either dismantled, removed, abolished, whatever. There's all these disruptions. But what are those buffers, those resilience buffers like language, or that knowledge from plants and animals in your food systems that create the resilience of community? And how do we reintroduce that when they get their new building, right? Their building is a home. I'm very fortunate to work in the international Inuit space and work with some elders that were the last igloo born elders. Like they were born in snow houses. So, and for the first 11 years, they were raised in an igloo. And so to me, like that knowledge and that, I mean, we need to keep that going, because it's not just fascinating. It is like that interconnectivity with the planet. And that to me is why, there'll be disruptions that humans will always lose out. The planet will win. So how do we make sure that we preserve the things so that we could continue to live here? Because not yet, but there is no planet B for me because I couldn't afford to go. So I'll just leave that there.
Thank you.
Twyla, is there anything you'd want to add in response?
No response. I think she covered it all.
Thank you for an excellent question, Marcy. Does anyone else have a question? I'm going to ask one if no one raises their hand. So I wrote this quote down as you were speaking, Jackie, that it's like a 10,000 piece puzzle with no picture on it. Like really, really, like that captures it so well. And I love the graphic that shows what a different kind of technical assistance and federal partnership might look like. Do you I'm curious to know from your perspective, like when does that relationship begin, right? Where's the starting point for that? Knowing that so many communities are facing such extreme threats. When does that start?
I think about that, and in my position, this partnership with NOAA has really opened my eyes to the opportunities that are out there. And because every federal partner has people behind the door, and it's about people who care. And so if you could connect with the people who care and build relationship, building relationship is never part of a grant, right? They don't say, here's $10,000 to travel and meet each other, and then let's start the grant. But that relationship building and that understanding, maybe not completely understanding, but starting to understand different worldviews is vitally important. And so forums like this, where we get to share out, really important. And then we all have other networks outside of this network, right? So it's just a matter of building that relationship and letting it organically grow. And that is the beginning, because that's how partnerships start. And then, then you include other partners, right? You were asking about how could we support, so we don't have language programs at ANTHC, but we have a network connected to 229 tribes. But if there was funding that said, we're going to support culture and language, we could funnel it. Like, we could use our network to help. So utilizing those networks in place and then building relationships, that's the start. That's where it starts.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I realize we're at the top of the hour, and I wish we had about 20 more minutes. But this has been an incredible presentation, and I'll just share from the network's perspective, this is a conversation that we'd really like to keep going, and see how we can be a partner with ANTHC and Alaska Native communities and others who also feel that this is a really important call to help move these recommendations forward. So extremely grateful for both of your time today in joining us, and for everyone who joined us via the Zoom room. We recorded this and we will put this up on our website. We have permission from Jackie and Twyla to do so, and share it as far and wide as we can. So just so grateful for your time today, and look forward to keeping this conversation going. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.
Yeah, Kuyanak, and thank you, Twyla, for all your support.
Brianna, thank you.